David Drucker of the Dispatch joins me now. David, good morning to you. Did you watch 60 Minutes with Kamala Harris?
I did.
What'd you think?
I mean, look, I didn't think it was a disaster. I thought some of the answers could have been sharper, more pointed. Obviously, political partisans on one side or the other are going to be happy or satisfied depending on how she answered. But again, I thought it was a case where, I mean, is she like Muhammad Ali in these interviews where she's, the form and the skill and the finesse is pristine? No, but is she good enough that she ought to be doing more of them because it would help, put her in a better position to win the election? Yeah, she ought to do more. And again, in that case, there'd be less attention on any one interview that might, or might not be mediocre.
I have to disagree with you, David. I hesitate to do so, but rarely have I been so unimpressed by the inability to come up with an answer to a question that was so obvious, which is this one. It's about grocery prices, cut number 7.
That prices were too high, and that's what she did. Now, a lot of people we know, Hugh, do not find this administration's agenda having to do with the economy sufficient because of inflation, and prices are still too high. And so that's a vulnerability she has. But as a matter of political spin, that was not a malpractice answer. It may
Oh,
not be the best answer, but it is not
it's the number one
why.
issue in the country. The number
Right,
one
and
issue is
right.
inflation.
Listen, Hugh, I'm not defending her or the administration's policy. What I'm saying is that a matter of politics, the number one thing she had to do with that answer is acknowledge what people are feeling, and she did that. And everything else around it, may diminish the strength of her answer, but it wasn't a complete failure because she acknowledged where people are. That's all.
Let me quote Lincoln: "Differ we must." Let me go to one more cut. Cut number 12. All right, translate, David Drucker. Pretend you're AI or Siri. What's that mean?
Yeah. Well, I don't know what the UN Charter participating means, but the other part of her answer was actually very direct, and it was an example of how, in many cases, she's not direct, where she said she would not meet bilaterally with Putin to deal with Ukraine, that Ukraine would have to be at the table, and that she's not interested in ending the war. She's interested in winning the war. That's something you don't hear that often from Democrats. It's a very clear contrast with Trump. And it's one of these topics, very few point, but there were all these other things attached to it. So, I mean, that's how I looked at the Ukraine answer.
Yeah, they could not. We're going to talk about this during the break, and we'll put David Drucker's response during the break on the YouTube extended interview. But the difference between Trump, who answers directly and then goes on sometimes off on a tangent, he always answers the question, then he goes off, and Kamala Harris, who never answers the question, then comes back at the end and kind of mentions it, could not be more sharp. And that's the contrast that's facing the American people. I'll get a prediction from David which way this race is going next as we enter the final 30 days. Hour number 2 of the Hugh Hewitt Show, straight ahead. Welcome back, America. I'm talking with David Drucker. David, I spent 27 minutes yesterday with the former president, probably asked him 24 questions. As I said before the break, the former president always answers the direct question and then often goes off onto a different subject. And then I have to come back and get him back to my outline because I want to know my questions. I don't really want to talk about what I already know he knows. Maybe the audience does. Kamala Harris is almost the exact opposite. She doesn't answer the direct question except in the most roundabout way. How do you think this race is going to shake out in the next 30 days, given those two very contrasting styles?
Yeah, listen, Hugh. Look, I'm traveling in Pennsylvania right now. I'm going to be on the road almost every week, not every week, through Election Day, and I just think this thing is really tight, right? I mean, each candidate has different vulnerabilities. Kamala Harris can't always answer a direct question, and voters are left wondering if they know what she believes, and if they figure out what she believes, will they like it? Donald Trump answers sometimes questions you don't even ask, and it leaves voters wondering if they like what they heard, and they end up suspicious about what he'll do beyond the things that he says he'll do that they like. There are all these other things he says he'll do that it doesn't sound very good to them. And so both of these candidates sort of come at this from different directions. But every piece of data we're seeing, every thing we're getting from the ground is that it's just close. Both sides feel good, but cautiously good for different reasons. Both sides feel like the other side has, a fatal flaw. It's just will voters end up in that place? So it is just tight, and maybe that changes next week or the week after. But right now, we don't have indications that that's changing.
In your reporting, in your talking to people, does anyone bring up the vice presidential debate? I've always said vice presidential debates don't matter, but I'm beginning to wonder that maybe the contrast between J.D. Vance and Tim Walz might be a coin flip push here. What do you think?
Well, Republicans bring it up uh, in that if they the Republicans that have brought it up to me have said that they thought J.D. Vance did a better job of describing Trump's policies than Trump sometimes does. And it could be because of those tangents that he'll go off on that distract from the policy. Um, and when Democrats bring it up, they mention the topic that was discussed at the very end of that debate about whether or not the senator was willing to acknowledge that Joe Biden won the last election. So each side kind of retreats to what's comfortable. But I haven't talked to anybody yet that felt like it was an earthquake of an event. I agree with you that in a race this close, anything could possibly move the needle. We don't have indications, at least at this point, that the vice presidential debate was any more consequential than previous vice presidential debates.
Now, let me conclude this way. I think J.D. overwhelmed Tim Walz, and Tim Walz is a liability now, in the way that Sarah Palin came to be a liability for John McCain. And every day we're gonna see less and less of him. But in Pennsylvania, this is J.D.'s ground. It's my ground. It's Selena Zito's ground. We know Western Pennsylvania intimately well. Are you staying in Philly, which is a different state, or are you going out to the western part of the state, or are you doing the whole thing?
Hugh, I was in with a colleague. The two of us were in Pittsburgh yesterday. I'm waking up in Erie today. We're headed to Cambria County, which is Johnstown, then up to Luzerne County in the Lehigh Valley. And then finally, we will finish the week in the Philadelphia suburbs, a real key battleground in this state. And again, I think that what I'm finding so far, but it's just the beginning of the trip, is this campaign is all about the people at the top of the ticket, and whatever Democrats believe about Senator Vance's vulnerabilities, whatever Republicans believe about Tim Walz's vulnerabilities, and they both have vulnerabilities, but they're different vulnerabilities. This conversation is really about two principles, as it usually is. Again, that could change, but that's where things are. But we're traveling the breadth of the state because we want to try and get a complete picture of both Trump country and Harris country and everything in between.
I hope you go to Camp Notre Dame up there in Erie. That's where I would spend my summers. It's run by the Gannon College guys, and it's a fabulous Erie's a fabulous place. Enjoy your trip, David Drucker. Thanks for spending a couple extra minutes with me.